So, welcome. So let me tell you why I picked this topic. So the thing is, since November last year till the beginning of May, I had the debatable, you can say it's unfortunate, I said it's fortunate, experience of being unemployed, or how a friend of mine calls it, fun-employed, because I knew that at some point I will find another job. But what I found interesting in my research was, in my search for a new job, was that the market I was used to wasn't there anymore. There were so many changes happening in terms of technology, speaking of whatever framework or language is hip at the minute, new technology trends like large language models, machine learning, and also the kind of, I was speaking with Julia today, the kind of vibes that companies have now. And I've been an engineering manager for the past 5 years. What is expected from an engineering manager? What is expected from a manager in a technology company? It's like what I was used to is like everybody tells you is like, stay away from the code. It's not your job anymore. Ciao. And boss is going. And now I was having very mixed signals from the market again. It was like there were people that were like, oh no, you have to code at least 70% of the time. And I was like, who's gonna do the managing then? And others that still stuck to the concept of you're a manager, that's not your main job. You can do it in your free time, but it's your free time if you have any. That usually doesn't happen. So I thought that could be an interesting conversation to have with these very nice people here, because we have a very different background. We have people that have been in engineering for 20 years and that have been leading organizations that actually help engineers finding jobs as freelancers. We have someone that had experience in very different fields within our industry, and we have someone that is more new to the market, but also has some of the coolest knowledge around lately. So it's not gonna be an interview, but I'm gonna start the conversation. Please join if you are curious, and if you want, I'll run around with one microphone, no problem. But so, folks on the stage, how has your feeling of the market changed in this past, let's say, post-COVID?
Okay, well, there is no denying that the market experienced first a dramatic growth after COVID. As Monica mentioned, I happen to work in one of the biggest freelance marketplaces in the world, Toptal, and I happen to have a very unique perspective at the company because I have served as the VP of Engineering and then as the VP of Research and Development. So I'm very familiar with the global trends. Basically, when the economy is hot, our profits skyrocket. When the economy is not hot, we are the first ones who are going to tell you this because companies don't hire as many freelancers as they would normally do. So for 2020, there was a short disruption of the market while people were wondering if the world was coming to an end. Around the end of the summer, they saw that the world wasn't coming to an end, but there was a lot of free money on the table. Christian mentioned the zero interest rates. And if you remember, all of the governments were pumping money in the economy because they were very afraid of an economic crash. People couldn't travel, couldn't go to restaurants. They had a lot of money to spend online shopping, using all sorts of services. So we saw a demand like nothing in the entire history of the company. And then all of this came to an end exactly 2 years later, around the end of 2020. And you probably saw it in the public news, massive layoffs in every famous company, layoffs that are continuing to this day. So clearly, the job market right now is not in a good shape. Monica mentioned this as well. From what we are seeing, things haven't started to recover yet. And I'm not psychic. I'm not sure when this is going to happen. But other than the economy, obviously we have to worry about the impact of Gen AI, because I know that a lot of companies are interested in Gen AI for one reason and one reason alone. Can they replace humans with Gen AI?
Thank you. How was it to start your job search in that time?
I think when I started during the job search, before COVID, it was very much easier to get the jobs because I was getting a lot of interview rounds and calls from the recruiters. But as soon as the COVID hit, and there are some new job opportunities which came in, like the prompt engineer, which was a new field altogether because of this Gen AI and the new technologies which are coming up. There was no such prompt engineer back in the 2018 or like back in the 2010 days. Now it's like very much prevalent in the prompt engineers or ethical engineers, or you just name it, sustainability engineers. There are so many roles and opportunities which are coming up, but of course there is a dearth of the opportunities in terms of what exactly is required. So job search hunting was difficult because no one was ready to take up the chance when the economy is going to get good. But there were like other booming opportunities which were also equally coming up. So it was just all the persistence, hard work, and just grooming your cover letter / your resume on the basis of the new Gen AI technologies that really helped in getting and landing this job that I'm presenting working in.
So you are more thinking that the role of an engineer is going to change more than being replaced by Gen AI?
I 100% agree that the jobs which were like monotonous or which were more involved like tedious jobs, they are definitely going to get replaced. But as we can say, like when the calculator was being invented, then people were also afraid that we don't need that, right? So new opportunities will definitely groom up, like the prompt engineers, as I mentioned before. And everyone needs to get upskilled because there is a boom of, again, this Gen AI technologies. So people or the engineers, they need to know. For the prompt engineering itself, also you need to have the exact prompts. You need to understand why the ChatGPT or any other large language model needs to give you a certain response. So you need to have the background and the knowledge behind it, and therefore, these kind of opportunities will groom up.
Thanks. Lucian, what's your take? What's your experience?
Yeah, I don't have the deep knowledge, so I will say a couple of points, starting with the last one. It's interesting that in a funny but also maybe concernful way, that I think for a company that is either a tech company or a company that is using technology a lot, right? Paying developers, it's a huge sum, and it's like the dream that is not only in these years, but a dream back many years, that we should automate the developer because it costs a lot of money. So maybe we will do it ourselves, like we are trying to automate ourselves out, but I think also the same, that probably this will, if this works, not only for fun things, but for more, how to say, reliable and more important in our daily lives part, maybe this will create some kind of demand for us to shift into some other stuff. That's one observation. Another one is, and we have, like just talking about the Ruby community, right? We kind of had multiple conversations, or at least in my newsletter, I noticed a lot of conversation about this thing that if you look at the Ruby jobs, most of them are for middle and seniors, and there are very little for juniors. And I think the current pressure makes this probably a bit worse, right? Because the companies not having enough money, talking about zero interest rate, they don't have money to spend on a junior. So if they need to hire, they are probably try to hire a senior. And if the market is down, a senior cheaper is the unicorn, right? It's for a company. So it might be a tough market for a junior in one way. And what I can say, but this is just my background, what worked for me when I was junior and I still keep this mindset, but it might be just one person example, is I'm a more of a generalist in some way. I did various things, what was needed. And yeah, when the market is up and the companies have a lot of money, you have deep specialization, right? I have a person that needs to do this job very, very tiny slice of the job requirement, but very well, right? But when the market is, it does not have that much money, let's say, you want to hire someone that can be flexible in various shapes. So, or at least this is a conclusion, a logical conclusion that I will extract. So, one possible direction for a junior will be to be a bit attentive also in some other parts, like listen a bit to the product and what does it mean to have a good product and what does it mean to talk to end users, or a bit of a higher level, what does it mean to be in an organization, or what is the role of a manager, but also in the stack a bit, right? Like what is more than just coding backend or front end or these kind of things. And yeah, it might be also, just pitching here out loud, a good opportunity to pick Rails, because it's one person framework, right? It could be like it is fitting very well a market like this, right? That you can build a product very easy. So in a way, even not having big success in applying, I have two encouragements that I'm pitching sometimes. Is one, write a blog about your learning experience. This is what I will do if I will be junior. I'm trying to do it also as a senior, but I don't have too much time, but I'm trying it, right? And maybe start a kind of project, can be an open source, can be something that you think will give you money, but that will give you an opportunity to understand a bit more what does it mean to build a product. So then you're not only on the technical side, but you are more aware of what's there. I don't want to use the term T-shape because it's very
That's a dirty
HR
word.
term, but I'm just saying, look left and right, yeah.
Thank you. And you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to say something on the topic of being a less experienced person in the current job market. I really hate the terms junior, seniors, whatever, because it's so overloaded and it means different things for different people. But I can tell you that even when we scaled back hiring significantly in the wake of the recession, we continued to invest in our academy for Ruby developers, because it was very hard for us to hire Ruby developers when the market was very hot, very saturated. So we had to train them in-house. And even though now it is super easy, there are plenty of available engineers on the market, we kept working on our academy, because we also believe it is important that in every organization there is something resembling the normal distribution of experience. You cannot have just super experienced people or super inexperienced. If you have super experienced, half of the time your team is demotivated because they feel that the tasks that they're working on do not reflect their skills, their knowledge. And if everybody is inexperienced, then you don't know what you're doing, and you might be rowing the boat in a circle. So this is something that we have been very careful to maintain, to inject fresh blood into the organization, to develop new people. And this might be subjective, but it has always been my observation that the less experienced people are usually more energetic and might become the catalyst for a change that an organization needs, because the more you've been in the business, the more you get used to certain problems, and you don't want to challenge the status quo, which is dangerous for everybody. So I think that regardless of the market, every smart organization should be investing in young, inexperienced people.
Absolutely. It goes back to that frozen caveman problem that you guys were talking about. But I personally found very tough to sell this idea, even in times when it was clear that there aren't enough senior engineers out there for you to hire, even if you have all that money. It's a bit of a tougher sell sometimes. But I totally agree with you. Like my personal experience, when it wasn't me launching that program, but we had actually someone that started as a working student at my company that pushed for having more working students joining. And both of the people that we got actually brought new ideas. I still remember to this day, there was this one guy that it's like one of our senior engineers. She is super smart. She spent a few days thinking about this huge problems, like, oh, how can I solve it? And then he came back to, usually working students in Germany work only 20 hours per week. So he came back from his lessons, and I was like, why don't we use the database for that? Like, we can query the database instead of writing the code. And she was like, oh, yeah, you're right. So he basically saved us another week of development just by looking at the problem from a different angle that she was too much of a Ruby and Rails engineer to think of. And there was a joke, this is a slightly different topic. There was a joke that was a running joke between me and a friend of mine, and it was like, either we stick with Ruby long enough for us to become like the engineer that wrote the code for the Voyager probe, or we go into management, because guess what? We're going to become the blue-collar workers of the tech industry as programmers. Any advice on how to potentially decide to go to the management path?
Okay. If you potentially want to do something, you should do it. That's the advice. I have told this story many times at a different type of conference, because unfortunately as a manager, I cannot speak only about weird features in programming languages. But I became a manager by an accident. I was hired to be one of the first engineers in a startup. And the manager, the person who was supposed to be my manager, never showed up for work. So they told me, okay, now you are the manager. Go hire the rest of the people, prepare the project plans, etc., etc. And I was like, okay, let's see how this is going to go. And at the beginning, I was extremely socially awkward. If you have met me as a real developer, I was like every stereotype in the books. I go to an interview with a person, and I literally don't know what I can say. I'm just thinking, oh, please let them say something stupid so I can say this interview is over and be done with this. So I didn't know I wanted to do it, but I had to do it. I did it for a while. Seemed it wasn't horrible for me, and I wasn't horrible, and you got to do more and more and more, and you suddenly become the manager of 200 people, and okay, it's doable. So yeah, just go for it, like Nike said.
Yeah, somehow a similar story, like when I got into being a manager, my manager left the company, level up, let's say, and she said, yeah, you should be. And I was in between being a developer and some kind of team lead or something like this. And I got into that position because I talk a lot and I ask a lot of questions. So I was a developer, but I was asking product managers and other people questions about what we should do, and they started to address questions to me because I was responding to the questions. So they started to ask me what's the status and how we are going to do this and this kind of things, or invite Lucian to tell us a bit about how to implement this or to get a high-level rough estimation and so on. And I was answering everything about that. I did not have a plan to be like this, and when my manager left, he said, yeah, you should be it. It was not that easy. I was taking the keyboards of my colleagues and implementing features, and so my manager before leaving was putting stickers on my keyboard. You should not do that if you want to be a manager. So I think it's not a white and black, or how to say, like it's an axis that you can be more. We're discussing this, right? You can be more technical and people, or only doing people manager and so on, and depends on the company where you want to be. But about this, I think it's also for me. I did this, and then I was doing freelancing, and then I pitched to a company that wanted to innovate their internal culture to be more innovative and more entrepreneurial, and they were looking for a role that was named Innovation Master, because they were thinking Scrum Master sounds well, so we can put the name that. And I pitched how to transform a company based on some ideas that I had about what programmers should do, because it was a developers company. And then from there, I arrived to the role that was called Innovation Product Owner, which was something like I was taking ownership of a team in the role of a product owner, and then doing some kind of processes that you can find them nicely named as design thinking or this kind of things, but basically taking developers to talk with end users and then generating ideas about what we can do, right? So this is how I got into that product ownership part. But I think for me, what is the distinction between those two, and what I invite anyone that is, let's say, a developer or on the technical side and wants to be more on the people management, I don't know if management, it's leadership side, I don't know what's a good name for that.
Yeah,
it's just try to, the idea is that you can do it technically probably well, but the idea is, can you rile up, or how to say, get a part of your colleagues to have an initiative together, and you have to do that without doing it yourself, right? So that's, for me, it's a good test that I should have done, to try to do something. It does not have to be technical. It can be, let's organize going out, and I have some ideas, but let's take some people and try to organize that, or something like this, and try it out to see how do you like to be in that situation where you should delegate the actual action to someone else, right? And there are a lot of learnings. If you are a bit more perfectionist, you'll have a lot of learnings out of this situation, how other people are doing an action, and it might not be the same as you see it done, and you have to correct some things, but also accept that there is another person that has some other opinions, right? And that kind of things, yes. So I don't know, I think that's the answer.
And if they don't fail, they're not gonna learn. So you also have to figure out when it's a good time for let someone trip, and it's like, okay, that's fine. They're not going to do it again. And instead, when it's important to manage more than lead and interject. Yeah. That's interesting, because I also ended up becoming a manager by happenstance. Well, not really by happenstance, but my manager noticed that I was doing some of the things you just mentioned. I was like, are you interested in this? And I'm like, let's try and see what happens. I was like, people don't hate me yet, so... Anything different, maybe in academia? If you want to make the move from academia to the industry, vice versa, what's your experience?
Okay, so in academia, we don't have the managers kind of a thing. We do have like the PIs, which are principal investigators for a specific labs, which is, again, not a managerial role, that you don't have the JIRA and all these things, but it's more about a sounding board, brainstorming your ideas with your researcher, like the supervisor kind of a thing. And, it's more or less, because research and industry, they are very, very different. In industry, we definitely need some end goals, the ROI. We need the product to be released. There is another cycle around, the sprint and whatnot stuff. In academia, there is nothing like that. For example, if you are targeting any research paper, then the timeline for the research paper is very flexible. So we don't have, the similar pillars like the way that it happens in industry, but in academia it's more about the hidden trials. You are doing a lot of experiments, and the experiments are not necessarily going to give the best results, but in industry you definitely are aiming to get the ROI around the experiments that you're running around. So that's what my take is.
Is there something you prefer between the two?
I think I said during my introduction I'm a machine learning engineer by profession, but a researcher by passion. So I definitely enjoy doing a lot of research, because that gives a lot of flexibility to brainstorm on the ideas, try out new ideas using the MIT supercomputers, which I don't generally get in the industry for that matter. So I think having a researcher mindset, so complementing of both the skills really helps in thinking through the perspective. For example, in a researcher, you are putting a lot of thought process you are experimenting a lot of hit and trials are happening. So that similar concept or the thought process you can replicate in the industry in order to build a product around or building something from the very scratch. So having the complementary skills really help.
Thank you. I see one question over there. Let me run. You go. Thanks. It's for the recording. Unfortunately, it doesn't work. Works for me, but.
Okay, so I see that we are talking a lot about people, the people path, and people who want to move from being engineers to EMs. But we also have engineers who love being engineers, and they want to grow as engineers, not as EMs. So how can someone who is a senior dev move from being a senior dev to a staff dev, from a staff dev to a senior staff dev? Because I think there's also a bit of leadership there. And as much as we love to code, as you begin to get into staff, senior staff, you are still expected to code less and then achieve through people. So what's your advice? What are the steps you think that people who want to go from senior dev to staff dev to senior staff, what's the kind of mindset that they should imbibe?
Thanks. Thank you, because this would have been part for a potential further question, also because we had somewhat similar conversation yesterday. My take on this, and then I'll give the microphone to someone else, is that you mentioned that there's a lot of leadership there. And I think even before becoming a staff engineer, that's what you need to develop. Already at the senior level, your first steps in a senior position would, in my opinion, need to be, how do I influence others without being their boss? And going back to what we were saying at the very beginning about the culture that companies have developed in recent years, even as a manager, like a people manager, in theory, you have the power of firing someone. So it's kind of like a strong incentive for people to listen to what you say. But what you want to have, in my opinion, and it works much better, is to have people that follow your lead and take their own decisions. And for that, again, it's very similar in that regard. But definitely then the technical part becomes less because you don't have that in the same space to develop that part. And that's where I think it becomes really, really interesting then. And I'll let the others speak now.
Well, that's a great question, Abi, and something that is very close to my heart, because we were in an interesting situation in Toptal in the past. We had just 2 roles in the engineering team. If you're not in the senior leadership, you're either an engineer or an engineering manager. There were no other roles in the earlier days of the company. And we noticed that this forced a lot of people who wanted to grow professionally to go for the managerial path just because they didn't want to be stuck professionally. And, there was just this one path. So, one thing that has to happen is to be in an environment where this second option even exists. I think you have to get to a certain size of a company. Like in a small company, it's rare that such roles even exist, because there usually everybody is doing a lot of different roles, maybe informally, so it doesn't make so much sense. But in a bigger, healthy organization, you definitely have to have more than one option. You cannot force people to be doing things that are going to make them miserable. So that's one thing. Yeah. And now that this is there, it becomes really interesting what is the role of the principal or staff engineer or the architect, for that matter, because for me, the role of an architect is often discussed as something independent, like this person like Gandalf, who lives somewhere in an ivory tower, constantly thinks about magical solutions to all the problems, but in reality, the architects are constantly negotiating with various people, and they're just as limited by the infamous triangle of constraints as anybody else. Like you might have a brilliant solution that is going to be super expensive to implement. So go get buy-in for this, or something is going to be very disruptive, or people just hate it. So we've observed that several people in our architectural team became architects with the idea that they're going to be like Gandalf, and self-demoted themselves after a while because they figured out they won't be just doing engineering work, but they have to be constantly on those hard negotiations. They have to influence people without authority, which is very hard. Like if I'm a director or a VP, I point my finger, get this done. Magic happens. Oh, I solve problems. But I don't really solve problems because I'm smart or influential. It's just because the chain of command works in my favor. And to be a principal and an architect is so much more challenging because somebody has to come up with compelling arguments to convince the management, their peers, etc., etc. And this is very, very hard. Especially in a bigger organization, you'll notice that many of the principal and architects cannot convince each other that something is a good idea. So I think that this work requires an amazing combination of communication, presentation, and technical skills, which are less rare than, more rare than unicorns. Not easy. But those parts are very, very important. And there is a reason why in many famous engineering organizations, principal and staff engineers make more than some directors of engineering, because if you're good at this job, you can probably have more impact for the organization than almost anybody else there. So very valuable career path, and something that everybody who is passionate about technology should consider.
I think he said a lot better, a lot of things that I agree. So I will try to say some practical stuff, but to tell you the truth, I never had a role that was called staff or principal, but I also did a lot of freelancing and basically fulfilled. Basically, I behave like if you have a problem, you tell it to me, and I go to support or whatever to find out more and design it and build it. But I was not chasing a label. But still, the role, I think it's important, like he said, in a bigger or smaller. But what I will say concrete about this is it's something like this. I think what I will do if I would like to grow into that role, one, I will focus on writing good. You have a good arguments in written form, right? Because we are debating, I'm not sure how are you, but mostly we are debating in PRs, in emails, in stuff, and face-to-face, of course. But let's say face-to-face, I think it's easy to have it in a way, but having a good debate to convince someone to change something or to adopt something, it's a skill that can be trained by writing, technical stuff, debates. So this is what I will do, one. The second one, of course, I think you have to be good technical, or at least to be able to go into a kind of technical leadership role, right? Informal a bit. So when someone is thinking in your team about we want to adopt something or not, or I want to grow something, you should be the person that they think about to ask in a way, right? And about this, I think what's important to do this, and also hard to actually have it, I think it's a mix of having strong opinions that they are right. Right? You have to be opinionated, or else nobody will talk with someone that will say, I think it's good like this, but also like this, and also like that, and like, okay, and we need a decision, right? So you have to have an opinion, and you also have to be right technical, because or else, like, you will say something and your opinion is not good. And I think that comes with practice. You need to practice that and see what fails, and to grow your strong technical background, but for sure having a good opinion, it's a part of these roles, however you name them. Possibly, I say possibly, right? Yeah.
Anything you want to add? If you want to.
I think for this one, I will just pass on.
Okay, no problem. Does this answer your question, Abhi? Fantastic. So we have 5 more minutes. One last question. We were speaking about freelancers, right? So some of us work for companies, some of us don't. And recently, I'm subscribed to this newsletter, Codefolio. Some of you might know. Also, someone that has been working with Ruby on Rails for quite some time. Great resources there. And his latest newsletter was about how we as engineers should also have a portfolio and how to build that. And I remembered you and I, Lucian, speaking about how to basically advertise yourself through your projects, and you started Short Ruby. So what would be your advice on that?
Yeah, I proposed a couple of talks about how to show your work from last year. So it's basically, I don't think I'm saying something that is extraordinary, and I don't have an advice like this is how to do it. But I think being more present online in some parts, talking about technical stuff, right? Like or sharing when you have something, it's a part of that, right? It's a part of coming back to growing, right? If you start a kind of side project, if it's technical, and you started this year and you keep putting at it, even if it has users or not, right? But you keep that 2 years, now you have 2 years experience with Ruby on Rails, right? It's like, that's a nice portfolio right there, right? Even if maybe people are using it or not, but if you keep improving it, right? That can be open source, can be closed source, I'm not going there. But I think what I'm trying to do with Short Ruby, for example, I know it's hard also for me to try to pitch my newsletter. I wear this t-shirt, but not from the beginning, to try to promote it. So promoting yourself, I see it hard to promote yourself, right? So with the newsletter, I'm trying to make the creator of something as central as possible. But what I recommend is that there are things that people are doing, and that is talking about yourself, and you can talk about yourself by sharing what you know. And I assure you, no matter where you are with your learning, you have something to say that someone will find it useful writing technical. Even if you say, this is the first day that I wrote the first line of Ruby, and this is what I think about it, and this was my experience, right? And because people are learning in different ways about that, and someone might match with your experience. But I think it's important to exercise that presentation skill, right? And then if you write, or maybe video, it's a format. When I say writing, it's one part, but writing is important, I will not dismiss it. But maybe you can create a video, I don't know, a TikTok or a reel or whatever forms are there. Creating that forces you to have a train of thoughts, right? And puts you in front. And it's a bit uncomfortable to show yourself, right? And people might criticize you and might say, on that line of code that you put there, something's wrong. I do it totally different in some ways, right? But that's feedback from someone unknown on the internet, so you can not read it if you don't want to. But the idea is to, I don't know why, the idea is, sorry? Closer, okay. But okay. The idea is to practice this, and as you're doing this more and more, you learn how to present yourself through the work that you're showing, but also this style, you can say, I wrote that article about that, so this is something, right? And of course, the basic will be just to keep a portfolio of nice things. You can now go into practical stuff, right? What I saw being very nice presentation, let's say. I'm not sure about the hiring part because I'm not doing the hiring, so you can ask him. But for example, you can have a profile on GitHub, right? It's like you create a username, you can create a README there and show something, right? So people are clicking on your name and going there. That is something. You can have, and you should have, your own website with your own name. You can be a very simple one page where you say, hey, this is me, this is what I know, this is what I'm looking for. That's basics, right? And then if you try to promote what you want to share in the world, there will be people who are listening. Come on, I mean, online people are listening to a lot of things that are very weird and not true. I tell you, share something about Ruby, and there will be people who find that useful, right? Yeah.
Thanks. Anything you want to add on the hiring part?
Of course, I can, Lucian is completely right. You have to promote yourself because nobody is more interested than you. And as a hiring manager, I can give you some concrete advice for the things that I'm looking for. Like, for instance, it's very hard to evaluate what somebody has done in their previous job. People claim to have done all sorts of things, but because I wasn't there and this is not public, it's very hard to prove. So what I like to see is some work in the public space. If they have open source projects or contributions, this is something that I can actually verify. If they have a blog, I can read a few articles. If they participated in some community events. In general, for me, always some community involvement speaks to a person that is probably above average, because I don't expect that the majority of people are doing something in the community. So if you're out there, that this is something that is going to catch my attention. And that there are some basics that so many people are overlooking, like a well-organized resume when you're applying for a job, or some presentable LinkedIn profile, because you'd be really shocked at the materials that some people are using when they apply for jobs. And you know, the reason why you have a resume is to get somebody's attention. So if you don't put the effort there, like, you don't need to be some community guru with 100 talks, 20 open source projects or whatever, but you know, at least you should project some level of professionalism, passion. I like to be able to understand why somebody is doing the things that they're doing. And I've had so many funny interviews, like, why are you interested in this job? Like, you know, what I like about IT is that typically they have ping pong tables and free massages and maybe something about technology, the business domain of the company. So it's weird, and you know, you have to invest a little bit to get a lot. This is where the returns of investment are the biggest for you. It's always important to stay up to date with current trends, because we live in such dynamic times. I can tell you that right now, the only people who are having an easy time finding jobs are people who are experts in machine learning, because they call it AI today, but as I think Ricardo told us earlier, it's just a fancy name for ML, and that there is a massive demand. So before this, when React suddenly spiked in popularity, you know, if you're a front-end engineer who was forward-thinking and quickly oriented yourself in this environment, you would have no problems finding a job. Before this, there was the boom of native mobile applications. Before this, blockchains. But at any point in time in our industry, something is always booming, and there is some specialty that you know, you can focus on, that is going to secure you a many good job opportunities in the industry. Rails and Ruby used to be this in 2006 to 2010, the peak of the Rails mania. And it's good that it was so big that we still have the community today, but there are always going to be trends, and from time to time you have to be a little bit flexible and maybe move on from the things that you felt were your passion, because there are always some other passions. When I was very young, I thought that C was the greatest programming language in the world, and I have a feeling I might have been wrong.
No, but totally agree. That's one of my biggest regrets. I mean, as much as I love Ruby, but I should have taken up the offer of learning Swift or Kotlin back in the days.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Just because I'm doing the newsletter. So I think this is an assertion that I'm doing, but Rails and Ruby was big when all these big companies were founded, like GitHub, Shopify, and GitLab, and so on, right? And it has a plateau, and then the industry grew, and then it maybe got a bit down, and so on. But what I'm seeing, it's growing again. Now, maybe this does not reflect now in more jobs, And because why? Because Shopify is hiring that many developers 10 years after it was founded, right? So the first year maybe there were 3 or 2 or only Toby or something like this, right? So if people are picking now Ruby to create startups, they will not suddenly hire 100 people, right? Something like this. But I, at least from my perspective, I feel the need to say that, right? I think our community is growing. You can see it in some things. More conferences are happening. Some of them new, some of them are reopened, right? There are more books, new books written, right? There are people which we saw today that are trying to bring the AI, ML, and so on into Ruby, right? And that reflects that people are still trying to use it to solve, to find new problems to solve with Ruby, right? There is in the front end something that we did not have, this hot wire, that I think you will see if I see this successful, you will see some until hot wire, basically the setup was Rails API with React front end, some of them, right? And you see it even now. We're having a senior that knows Rails and React, right? Senior in both of them, let's say. But you will see some rewriting. So these are just some, how do you call this, future projections. But if you have the time and money, or I don't know, the position that you invest now in Ruby, and this is true, you might start today with Hotwire and Rails and Ruby, and this is growing in 2 or 3 years, you are the senior that these new things will try to hire. Or if you are senior now but did not dig into these ones, I will dig into it. So you can also make the bet to say, okay, the community can offer an alternative, right? If you can afford to stay, if you don't find a job now, let's say, if you can afford to stay, believing that it will grow. And at least from inside the community, looking at new things happening, at least we inside believe in ourselves, right? This is why people are creating new products and books and so on. At least we believe more in ourselves. And this will show. I'm not sure if this will pick more than JavaScript and so on, because that's another type of competition, right? But also, if you go into just saying into JavaScript, then you suddenly have a lot of competition on the jobs, right? So it's a smaller community, but also then smaller people applying, right? More companies are interested in inviting you to events and pitching you to apply there. So there are pros and cons, of course, but maybe a longer time to find a job. I'm just sharing a perspective here, and it's mostly also what I believe. I'm not basing this on some big numbers or something like a trend or something, but it's just something that I wanted to share.
Voyager probe. Thank you very much. I hope you had fun. Now you can clap. Thank you.